Hello, Judson community, and thank you for joining us for Virtual Chapel. Whether you plan to worship out loud or quietly in your own space, we hope that this is a meditative and peaceful environment for you. Join us as we worship.
Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath that we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath that we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me
how is your 2020 going? Like, if you were to rate it from a scale of 1 to 10, how much would you recommend 2020? Like, let's just do this year over again. Probably not higher than 5. Probably not higher than 4, 3, 2. Would it be less than 1 that you'd recommend 2020? I mean, if you've forgotten, let's just run through a small list of things that have happened this year. I mean, do you remember? We started off with the Amazonian and Australian wildfires. We had Africa, Pakistan, and India. They saw devastating swarms of locusts. And then we had an impeachment trial, which, didn't divide the country. It was totally fine. Then COVID spread around the globe. It started as a small, localized issue, and then it grew into an epidemic and then a pandemic, and now nobody plays the game anymore. We had to stop seeing some of the people that we most loved. Life completely ground to a halt. And don't forget about murder hornets. Seriously, if you go walking in the woods in the Pacific Northwest, do not forget about murder hornets. We had food and material insecurity as people had to wait for hours outside food banks, or you had to wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for toilet paper. Everything went online, from church to government meetings to courthouses to everything. The killing of George Floyd sparked a global conversation about race that continues to this day. We had a Category 4 hurricane just recently hit the Gulf Coast, and we found out that the worst human rights issue in China right now, where they are seeking to exterminate the Uyghur people, the worst human rights issue of this century. We are in the middle of a contentious election cycle, and it seems like it's going to go pretty well. This has been an exhausting year. 0 out of 10, do not recommend. It would be soft pedaling to say that this year has taken a toll. But strangely enough, the toll that I feel is not borne so much by the tragedies that we've witnessed, though it's been many and they have been devastating. I have found myself despairing not just about COVID or the economy or our new life online, but about what it's revealed about us, about what it's revealed about me. It's like 2020, with all of its stress and insanity, has revealed something fundamentally broken in our society. It's just pulled back the curtain to see what's underneath, and it's not very good. I mean, surely you've noticed division. I mean, it's not hard to see it on the political stage, but on-stage rivalries seem to be seeping into our relationships. It's devolved from competition and conversation into this strange form of othering where we assume the worst about each other. We post spiteful memes. We laugh at others' missteps, and it's a poison. It's a poison that travels from our own heart, where we end up turning on friends, we fight with family, and we disregard thoughtful disagreement. We are a divided people. I mean, you might have noticed as well, amidst all of this, there's a leadership crisis. I mean, crisis tends in general to put leaders' feet to the fire in ways that are revealing. And either our leaders are not living up to what we had hoped they could be in the midst of crisis, or they are utterly failing altogether. We found out that leaders were being duplicitous, that they were being abusive, that they used power to protect themselves. We're losing the ability to trust, and I get it. I mean, surely you've noticed, surely you've felt the anxiety. Maybe you feel it just as I do. It's more than just uncertainty. The stakes somehow feel higher. They feel potentially catastrophic. And collectively, it's like our bodies are all in overdrive. We're reacting and overreacting and reacting and overreacting to every single thing. And our amygdala is firing all the time with fight, flight, or freeze. We are doom scrolling, rage posting, sarcastic, and caustic. It's not just you. It's everywhere. In the words of family systems therapist and Jewish rabbi Edwin Friedman, he says, we are a chronically anxious people. He noticed this when working with families and family systems, but eventually he found out that this was true in Western society as a whole, that not just families, but that Western society was chronically anxious, that we are advancing economically and technologically, but we are regressing emotionally and relationally. So as a Western society, we are making incredible innovations with the iPhone and iPad and everything with Amazon and online, but everything in us, our relationships and our own emotional life, it is regressing. Our emotional life is not keeping pace with the rate of our technological advancements. So he described an endless cycle wherein reactivity, which he describes as the vicious cycle of intense reactions of each member to events and to one another, where reactivity leads to herding, which is a process through which the forces for togetherness triumph over the forces for individuality, and they move to, here's the key, they move to adapt to the least mature members of the group. Now, that leads to blame displacement, which is an emotional state in which family members focus on forces that have victimized them rather than taking responsibility for their own being and destiny, which leads to a quick fix mentality, or as he says, it's a low threshold for pain that constantly seeks symptom relief rather than fundamental change. And at the center, you have a lack of well-differentiated leadership. So you have reactivity leading to herding, leading to blame displacement, leading to a quick fix mentality. And at the center of this whole thing is a lack of well-differentiated leadership, which is a failure of nerve, he says, that both stems and contributes to the first four. See, the poorly differentiated leader motivates the system by introducing more anxiety, more fear, more uncertainty. The poorly differentiated leader is the one who enmeshes him or herself in with the drama and gets the whole system stuck in this weird, vicious cycle. And there's only one way to break the cycle. You have to change the center. You have to introduce what he calls is a non-anxious presence. That's someone from the outside, someone from outside the chaotic, anxious system has to be introduced into the system in order to help get everyone unstuck. The non-anxious presence is able to separate themselves from toxic emotional processes. They exhibit self-regulation. They bring clarity about vision and principles. The non-anxious presence offers vulnerability. The non-anxious presence offers tenderness. All it takes is a non-anxious presence. Someone grounded, someone unstuck, someone sturdy and reliable, who we can bank on not to just get stuck and mired in the anxiety, but who pulls us all out of it. Friedman goes on in his book to tell a story about a football coach and his team. He said that if I have wide receivers who are complaining that the quarterback is throwing too hard, what do? Do I tell the wide receivers to just deal with it, or do I tell the quarterback to soften his throw? No, I tell the quarterback to throw as hard as you can because that is what's absolutely necessary, and the wide receivers have to adapt. The non-anxious presence calls us higher. There's this scene in the Bible found in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus addresses this huge crowd that's gathered around him. Now, this kind of a thing wasn't unusual for Jesus because people were regularly hanging on his every word. They were following him from town to town, and he couldn't get away from them when he tried, because they had never seen anything like this Jesus. He was unlike any rabbi of the time. He was unlike any teacher, unlike any public servant. He was different. And so he has this crowd gathered around him, and Jesus uses the opportunity to just start teaching. Now, you have to understand a little bit about this crowd that was gathered around him at this time. They were mostly day laborers. They were small business owners, and they were considered low class. They had to deal with periodic high unemployment numbers with no safety net. They were the victims of racist policies from the Romans. If they needed a loan, the banks of their day were predatory, which added major inflation problems. They lived under the authority of Rome, which was a brutal and violent oppressor, and everything about their way of life was socially charged. And the government at the time thrived on corruption and fear, and one of their few public services that Rome offered was corpse collecting. And so here's this Jewish rabbi. He's talking to this huge crowd who's desperate for a word of hope. How does this Jesus open his teaching? Well, he says things like, "Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the hungry, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So do you see what he's doing? Do you see what this Jesus is doing in the midst of this gathered crowd under the shadow of the Roman Empire? He's talking about them. He's saying that there's a new kingdom coming, that there is a new kingdom with a different set of rules, one that's not based on power and control. It doesn't privilege the privileged. It's for them. It's for all who want to join, but it's for them. Because this kingdom is like a grand table where everybody is given a seat. Now fast forward a little bit in his message, and he jumps into prayer. He jumps into prayer. And he starts teaching them how to pray. And he says to pray like this. This is Matthew 6, starting in verse 9. He says, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed or holy be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." That's the prayer he says they should pray. Now, notice that in the midst of all of the insanity, when they're clamoring to learn about this new kingdom that's breaking into their midst, what does Jesus talk about? He talks about prayer. He gives them a practice. In fact, he's actually informing a practice they already have, because they would pray regularly several times a day. And he says, you know, this practice that you have of prayer, I think you should fill it with this kind of a meaning, with this kind of a hopeful, prayerful cry to God. Jesus is getting his audience to dial into a spiritual reality that can help ground them in the midst of the chaos of their world. Did you catch that? That the Lord's Prayer is Jesus' offering to his people, where his goal is to help ground them, give them a foundation in the midst of crazy chaos and insanity of their world. Sounds like we could use some of this. In a book titled "Never Leave Us Alone: The Prayer Life of Dr. Martin Luther King," author Lewis Baldwin writes, he says, "King defined prayer variously as an expression of one's faith in God, as the individual's response to God, as a sincere communication with God, and as a natural outpouring of the human spirit. The act of praying for him was an expression of the soul's deepest yearnings, or a reaching outward and upward to the supernatural realm for the fulfillment to needs and desires that cannot be met through humanly contrived means." that cannot be met through humanly contrived means. When the world is stuck, when you're stuck, when our families are stuck, when our community is stuck, when our churches are stuck, when your social media feed or whatever is an absolute dumpster fire, when you're caught in Friedman's vicious cycle, Jesus teaches us to pray. Because in prayer, we connect to the non-anxious presence. In prayer, God interrupts our vicious cycle and he becomes our non-anxious presence. He enters into our vicious cycle and he disrupts it. And Jesus has given us a practice, and it's prayer. So for you, what does prayer look like for you? Is it just random murmurings? Does it not even exist at all? Or is it an intentional time where you can petition the Lord for help? Petition him to be your non-anxious presence. Because Jesus starts off the Lord's Prayer with some just introductory considerations for us. He starts us off with two grounding truths that's designed for us to just hold on to when everything else goes sideways. And you see it in Matthew 6:9, where he says, "Our Father in heaven, holy or hallowed be your name." So Jesus gives us the first handle. When everything goes sideways, when it's all chaos, when we can't figure out what's going on, we don't know right from up and left from right and all of that, Jesus tells us that the very first thing we need to know, the very thing we can claim first in our prayers, is that God is our Father. That God is our Father. And not just that God is our Father, but that God is our tender Father. You see the word in Greek and how it was used, it was Abba, which didn't mean something closer to daddy, but it meant an endearing relationship between father and child. And so it was dad, father, my good father, my tender father, the one who cares for me, loves me, and oversees the well-being of my life. But I know that for many of us, thinking of God as Father surfaces notions of an absent father, a passive father, or an abusive father, or a harsh father, or a selective father, maybe a father who only praised you when you did something good, or a father and you fill in the blank. What we do often is we bring this baggage from our human relationships with our fathers and we just import them to God. And the interesting thing is, it's not like Jesus, in Jesus' day, everybody was perfect fathers. It's not like all of a sudden when they thought God as Father, nobody brought baggage in the first century. No, there was still hurt and brokenness around fatherhood, and yet Jesus still uses this phrase, our Father. Maybe it's because Jesus wants to bring healing. That the very reason he uses this phrase, our Father, and he encourages us to pray this phrase, our Father, and he says this is one of the most fundamental truths that you can claim about God and your relationship to God, is because he wants to heal your father wounds. College is a great time to begin or continue some of that work. And I encourage you to do that work now while you're in college, because I promise you it will come out later on in life. And as Jesus encourages us to pray and claim our Father, he is simultaneously giving us an expression of how much God loves us and how he's tender towards us and how much he cares for us. And I'd argue he's inviting us towards healing so we can have a restored vision of fatherhood. We can have a restored vision of what it means for God to care for us. That maybe we can lay down our baggage at his feet and say, you can redeem my notion of fatherhood. Commenting on this passage, Pastor Rich Villodas notices that when Jesus opens his prayer with our Father, he says, we are reminded that God is fundamentally a tender and embracing parent. He says this is arguably the most important revelation Jesus gives us of God, that God's tenderness and embrace is to make us tender as well. Don't miss that. This is arguably the most important revelation that Jesus gives us of God himself, God our Father. When Jesus talks about God as our Father, he's telling us that God can be trusted. In the midst of our chaos, in the midst of our loneliness, in the midst of our chronic anxiety, that God tenderly embraces us, that he is our true good parent who listens, who responds, who cares, who loves. Like in the words of Friedman, God is our non-anxious presence. God is the one who is truly unstuck from our system. So here's the question. How could your life look different if you believed that God was tender towards you? That he wasn't just tolerating you, that he wasn't just waiting for you to change, that he wasn't waiting for you to perform or just be better, that he wasn't waiting for you to earn his affection or even just his gaze, but that God himself laughs with you. That the most fundamental expression of God is love, that he delights in you, that he smiles at you, that he sings songs over you, that he sits with your problems. He just sits with you, just you, as you are, you being you. Yeah, but what about all those hypocritical Christians? They kind of turn me off to this whole God as Father thing, or just God thing in general. And I get it. But could it be that the tenderness of God towards even those hypocritical people is proof that he'll always be tender towards you, even when you're a bit hypocritical? It doesn't seem to disprove the fact that God could be this tender Father, but maybe it actually further proves his goodness, his care, his love, his grace. God is our Father. The second thing that Jesus encourages us to claim right out the gate with this Lord's Prayer is he says, "Holy be your name." Holy be your name. And again, Rich Velotis helps us here when he says, there is no name, country, leader, ideology, etc., that we deem sacred and holy, but God's name alone. Every other name is subject to critique. See, there's no name, country, leader, or ideology that we deem as sacred or holy except for God's name alone. Every other name is subject to critique. Here's why this matters. Because this is a foundation for us. Every other organization, political party, cause, job wants your full allegiance. They probably want your money, but they want your full allegiance, your time, attention, your influence, whatever. They want to inundate you with news, information, or specials. They want to keep your attention for as long as possible, so they'll keep amping up the content that they'll be sending you so that you'll stay and keep scrolling like, oh, that's interesting, that's weird. They want your attention for as long as possible, and they don't care what you're looking at on their site or platform or whatever, as long as it's theirs. But God's name alone is holy. His name alone is sacred. Listen, it's okay to shut off your phone, to put away the distractions, to just spend time with God, your Father. It's okay to pull away from social activity and the news and your friends at times, and connect with the Father who's tender towards you. In fact, to say it stronger, it's necessary. Okay, say it again, stronger. You need to do this. You need to have a time where you put your phone away. The Bible calls this Sabbath. And also, as a part of this, you need to sleep. Your brain literally shuts down when you don't sleep. So sleep. You need to sleep and you need to put your phone away. Do both of those things and just claim that it's spiritual and all that good stuff. So anyway, let's return again to Lewis Baldwin and his conversation about Dr. King. will notice this. He said prayer was King's secret weapon in the civil rights movement. In no uncertain terms, he affirmed both openly and in subtle ways the indispensable relationship between the activity of praying and the quest for greater rights and freedoms. He goes on, when movement leaders were cursed, arrested and assaulted, or killed in street demonstrations, King and others found the will to go on through prayer. King really believed that under the power of prayer, no force of evil, however great and menacing, could destroy the forward march toward freedom, justice, and peace. This incurable optimism and hope that King brought to the movement stemmed first and foremost from his unwavering faith in the power and efficacy of prayer. Reverend Dr. King knew the power of prayer. He knew the truth that God is his Father and his name alone deserves full allegiance. So if there are forces that do not encourage, that do not foster freedom and justice, he would fight against it in the name of Christian freedom, in the name of Christian justice. It fueled his ministry. It had the forward march toward freedom, justice, and peace. May we be the kind of people who pray this every morning. In fact, I challenge you for the next 4 weeks to make this your habit as we make our way through this series. Instead of waking up and grumbling, well, what's next? What do I have to do next? Let's be the kind of people who break free from the vicious cycle and connect to Jesus as our true, non-anxious presence, rooted in the truth that God is our tender Father and his name alone deserves our full allegiance. I'll close with a rewritten version of the Lord's Prayer by Dallas Willard. He says, "Dear Father, always near us, may your name be treasured and loved. May your rule be completed in us. May your will be done here on earth in just the way it is done in heaven. Give us today the things that we need today. And forgive us our sins and impositions on you, as we are forgiving all who in any way offended us. Please don't put us through trials, but deliver us from everything bad. Because you are the one in charge, and you have all the power, and the glory is yours too forever, which is just the way we want it. Amen.